welcome to another episode of the Make Mental Health Matter show. I am your host, Kelly Melissa Reinhart, and as with every show, I am excited for my guest for today and for you to be back, whether you are back and you're watching or listening, or maybe this is your first time watching the Make Mental Health Matter show. Give you a little bit of background that I I always say we, I don't know. I usually always have a guest. So I bring guests who are either professionals in the mental health space, advocates of mental health, or those that have lived experience. But if you are somebody that has been watching or listening to the show for quite some time, you probably realize that most of my guests have a reason or a story as to why they do what they do in their lives today. And it's a journey. It really truly is this journey, the thing that we call life, that we travel down. And none of us really understand or know exactly what we're going to experience. And that is why it is important, at least for me, to bring guests who really have that story to show you or have you just listen to the stories so that you know you're not alone. Because oftentimes we feel like we're completely alone, but in reality there's so many people out there that really truly want to help. And that's why I love to bring people and their resources and be able to share those experiences, which also brings us to that place of hope and knowing that there is and recovery is possible. So, without rambling even more, I am going to introduce my guest for today. So, Dr. Keith McNally, who is a Marine combat veteran and 5-time suicide survivor, who is about to embark on a 2,193-mile hike across 14 states from Georgia to Maine to bring awareness, hope, and support to other veterans who are suffering in silence. He could use he can add lots of value to the audience, and it's just going to be a really great conversation about this hike that he's going to do and what he does professionally and personally. So, without further ado, let me bring see, you got the corner. I don't know why that went in the corner. We're gonna make this big. There we go. Transition. Thank you, Keith, so much for joining me.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate being here. So that's a lot what you just introduced me, and so I do appreciate that.
Of course. Yeah, I know when we got connected, I heard a little blip of your story and I was like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, just amazing what you're about to do and then also knowing your background too." So can you share with the audience a little bit more about your story and your journey?
I will give it my best shot. And so, in the intro, you said I'm a U.S. Marine combat veteran, and so I did serve when I was very, very young. And so we're talking right out of high school, 18, 19, 20 years old. Um, and did a tour overseas. And so typically it was a tour in Panama when we invaded Noriega space many, many years ago. I didn't do well after I was discharged from the Corps. And since that time, usually I say 1996 was my first suicide attempt. Now, you had forgot the word attempt. So if we used your story about my story, I've died and come back to life 5 times, and I'm okay with that. But it was, 5 suicide attempts. First one being in 1996, and the last one being, and I say last because it's going to be my last, in 2021. Really, lots of challenges, and so everything from suicide ideation to PTSD. Typically, the things that when you're placed in a space and a place where your body and your brain don't know how to make sense of it all, um, the body and the mind tend to react negatively to all of that. And so I have been trying to understand it. And then in the past 2 years, and especially last year, to the time of this recording, trying to step into a place of healing. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Wow. Well, thank you for adding a little bit more to your story also, and knowing that that is your last in the past, and but the transition, and so the reason this always is something that I like to bring up, but is brought up most of the times that I have veterans on, is that transition from military to civilian life. And so I'm curious, like, was that the biggest transition, or was it like going into the military, doing all the things, and then everything else that happened afterwards or during, possibly? I guess that is a big question. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So, and there's different ways to approach that. So you want to go in, you go into the service, expecting really good things. This is your stepping out. You're becoming an adult, right? From high school into adult. And, back in the late 80s, the biggest thing that we had, historically, was World War One, two, Vietnam. And now since the 80s, we've gone into Afghanistan and have other, conflicts. But you kind of go into the service. Um, it's your next job out of high school, really. You're not prepared for college. You're not really mature enough to kind of step into that space. And so you're thinking of it as just another job. To put this in context, my dad was a Navy veteran, and so I had a conversation with him and put this in greater context. The late 80s, 90s, Rambo was the hero, right? And so you've got this military hero is kind of in the forefront of a young man's mind, and say, well, I'm gonna be Rambo. I'm gonna be a hero. And so when you go into the service, and I went into the Marines, I went into the infantry, and you're trained in boot camp to do all the military stuff, the infantry stuff, and then you go train and you get trained into your specialty. And my specialty was mortars, and so that's a support of frontline infantry. So I typically say that I wasn't trained to engage the enemy firsthand. So I was support. I was part of a support network, a support team. And then when you're put into a situation where you are actually engaging the enemy firsthand, that's a little bit of a mindset shift. And I didn't react well to that experience. And so when we came back to the States, and when I left the service, um, I had a whole, I had trouble transitioning. I had very much a lot of trouble transitioning back into the civilian world. Didn't have any real job skills. What am I going to do? A friend said, well, you do what everybody else does. You go to college. So I did. And that was its own struggle to begin with. What I've learned, in the 20 years, since that time, is that there is this window of time, that's this 12-month window of time, that when a service member leaves the service, becomes a veteran, that first 12 months is really critical in terms of, like, a make or break critical. Are they going to be successful back in the civilian world, or are they not going to be successful in the civilian world? And that means that encompasses a whole lot, from, how you engage in society, whether or not you're married or partnered, the job, housing, all of those things. And so I was part of that group that wasn't too successful in the transition out.
Yeah, and so personally, have not ever been military, but my dad was in the military. My husband's dad was in the military. And I actually remember my dad, he went to Panama to actually help build roads and all different. I don't know exactly what they did specifically down there, but I do know he went to Panama and the Gulf War. They were in Germany, so they were kind of the backup,
Mhm.
a little bit about what you were talking. But it is definitely that that transition from being on the backside to the front line, and then transition out of military into civilian life. I have we did a actually a Veterans Day special last year, and we kind of had a little. It was easy for maybe one or two, and then it was like really really hard for the rest of the people that were on the panel. So I think that's something that we don't acknowledge as much as we need to, is that you are, especially I mean, you were in the Marines, which from my understanding of that is they are very strict. The boot camp and all the things leading up are is really really hard, to the point of, I've heard it's like borderline brainwashing, I guess is the best way that I can explain. But it just seems like a much more challenging branch, I guess. I don't know if that is
We
true
have
or
a
not.
reputation that, we're I don't know, I'm not gonna cuss, so I don't know what your space is here. But there's a reputation of, of what a Marine is or what a Marine should be. And so, uh, throughout boot camp, we always kind of push towards, the rough and tough and all that kind of stuff. Now, not every man or woman, I should say, who goes into the Corps, um, fits that persona. And so boot camp, that 16 weeks of brainwashing or whatever you want to call it, is designed to create this uh, person who can face challenges successfully, whatever they are, whether they're physical, mental, emotional. Um, but I tell you what, not everybody who comes out of boot camp, or serves in, I want to say in their time, but at least serves their time as a Marine, and then it goes into a combat situation, is going to come out successful. I think there's a lot of things that still need to happen, um, in terms of general service members, and especially, the elite service members, whether you go Green Beret or Special Forces, or in Marine Corps' case, Force Recon. um, the whole capacity of being able to debrief and being able to talk about the challenges that you do face with somebody who's licensed and professional, credentialed, whether that be a priest or a therapist or whatever. We typically don't get that, or at least we did in the time. So again, 80s, 90s, maybe that's have changed in the time since, and I hope it has, where those who are face challenges can go seek help without it being taboo, or they're being shamed. And so I guess that may be something we could talk about in this conversation, but at the very least it's something that should be talked about as a general conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely I don't know if it's gotten better. I know that the conversation is brought up a lot more, and I only know this from the nonprofit side, as we started trying to really help veterans or military, and we didn't have very many people like being able to offer services as far as alternative therapy,
Mhm.
ones that we didn't have to report. And we didn't have a ton of luck in that space, to be honest, just because everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people are worried that it's going to go on the record, right? But I think that is an important part of the conversation, is that we need to start getting better, because self-care is so important, whether you're in the military or a civilian or whomever, right? It's good for everybody across the board, and we all have mental health, we all have a brain, and all of us should have therapists, or at least have somebody to talk to, right? Even
Absolutely.
mental health professionals, we all need therapists too. So
And so true. And so what happens, typically, uh, the mind gets a bit screwed up. And so a lot of people, a lot of service members who, especially when they've served in a forward area, and a forward area is basically a combat area, um, come out of that situation with what's diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress, which is one of the diagnoses that I have, including major depressive disorder with suicide ideation and things like that. But um, what happened specifically with me is that I had started developing these symptoms, over time, based off of the trauma that my body and my mind are not dealing with, very well. Um, in addition to the five suicide attempts over the 20 years, there's also the hallucinations or the nightmares and the sleepless nights and all of the other, line items that fit under this umbrella of what we call post-traumatic stress and PTSD. And so even service members or veterans may not even recognize it. And to be quite honest, I didn't recognize it as this umbrella package. I just knew that I had nightmares, and sometimes they were very vivid. There were times where I'd see things, and other people are looking at me kind of strange because I'm trying to explain what I'm seeing, and it's not really there. And so there are some critical things that you're right. Does it go on your service record as a civilian? What do as a service member, it could and it should, because you're dealing with these issues that in a very real sense, if you're dealing with these symptomologies, these symptoms in service, they're not only affecting you, they're affecting how you're interacting with other people. And if you were to go back into a forward, like a combat situation, or even in a typical work situation, um, it could negatively affect your performance and the performance of your team. And so it's something that is very real and needs to be addressed. As a civilian, the same rules apply. It's not only just going to affect the individual, it's going to affect, your relations with family, whether there's a partner or parents or you're a parent with your kids. It's going to affect your relationship with, potential employers, your current employer, and how people really do interact with you on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there's always this snowball effect. Like when you said that, that's what came to mind, is that it's not just only affecting you, but it does affect everyone else around you too. Not that it's like fully about them. I mean, I feel like it's also about us, right? And like how and what we're experiencing, which should be validated,
Mhm.
but also considering those that are around us and how we show up for them, especially when talking about active military, but then, I mean, making that transition, right? So, yeah, this, I love this conversation, but we're going to go to our first quick sponsored break. And then I had a question that popped up into my head, or a thought. So once we get back, I will ask you that and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay.
All right. We'll be right back after this quick sponsored break.
Have you ever felt completely alone?
Like your life doesn't matter.
One person dies due to suicide every 40 seconds.
You are not alone. Call the National Suicide Lifeline at 988.
Hope and recovery is possible.
1 in 8 people globally live with a mental disorder.
That's why empowering minds saves lives.
We need your help.
With only $19 a month, you help us save lives through mental health and suicide prevention education.
Scan the QR code or go to makementalhealthmatter.org to sign up as a warrior for mental health today.
Hi everyone, I am Sinead from Brador. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. Please join me in my Power Hour every Sunday, 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on E360 TV. Mwah!
What's going on, beautiful people? I'm Sean French, and I am the host of the Determined Society. Join us right here on Vitality TV every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern for stories of grit, determination, and excellence right here on E360 TV.
And like that, we're back. If you just happen to be joining the Make Mental Health Matter show, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you go back and watch the first half of this because Dr. Keith and I have had some really great conversations. And I alluded to a thought or question that was popping up into my head as we were really talking about the importance of having the conversation with. Whether you are active military, you're making that transition from active to civilian life, you are a veteran who is struggling, all of this is really a part of the conversation that we should be having because that transition can be really, really hard on some people. Some other people have different support, and there's kind of this snowball effect that happens depending on what you're experiencing and how that transition is for you. But Dr. Keith, you had shared that you have attempted suicide 5 times. The last one being 2021, and that will be your last forever. Also, understanding that you had some, I don't, I guess I don't know if you call them hallucinations, but I'm curious, how did all of this, like, how did you get to that point that you became suicidal, or is it something that you have experienced? I know it's been a really big timeline, but did you or have you ever recognized that it might have come from childhood, or how did that look for you?
Because this is specifically about me, the best way to approach the answer to that question is lots of variables come into play. So you may, I don't have certain resources. I may not have the financial resources at a time when kind of things imploded. You know, you lose a job, what do you do? And you really struggle. But when you enter a situation where you think life is going to be okay and it's running smoothly, and then all of a sudden there's this impact, this block, and life just kind of explodes or implodes, and you don't have the strategies. And I guess that's a really good way of exploring this. You don't have the strategies, you don't have the resources, you don't know what to do. Things seem hopeless. Now, if you add the fact that there's trauma embedded in the body, then that trauma says things are hopeless. They may not be actually hopeless. You know, you just in this situation, whether you're again in a family situation or you're alone or whatever that is, the the mind plays its own tricks on us. And so when we allow that to happen, as I did, um, things fall apart. And they then just follow this linear path of things are bad, things aren't getting better no matter what you try. Things get worse, things aren't getting better no matter what you try. And you is me, you know, so this is personal. And with each of the progression, the worsening of the situation, I get to the point where everything is hopeless. There is no solution to whatever the problem is. And at this point, when you get to this really, and the metaphor is this really dark place, this really black place, this place where you are alone, you feel alone, you know, you're crying, and I'll say this on your, I've said it on other shows, you know, you're crying in the closet, you're crying by yourself, and you don't think there's anyone who you really can turn to. Even the 988, you know, at the time, you know, that 988 crisis line that's in your, you know, your advertisement, your commercial, is only recent. I mean, that's only 2 years old. And I actually interviewed the individual who was partly responsible for that because her husband died by suicide, a dozen or so years ago, and left her and her sons in complete trauma, and so it took many, many years for her to recover and her sons to kind of recover, and for her to kind of spearhead this idea that there needs to be this safe space that you can go to. And even if it's an anonymous phone call, or even if you're calling for somebody else, that there is somebody to talk to. Now, the emergency situation is, you may not, it's not about wanting to die sometimes. It's not wanting to take that next breath, not wanting to live, not wanting to feel the emptiness, the pain, the anxiety, the overwhelm, the frustration of what your life has become, because that place is really, really scary. And for me, up until recently, 2021, I say, is my last attempt, because it's been since that time, so the time of this recording, early 2025, there was something that actually changed within me. But before I actually go into that, I've been monologuing for some time. I want to bring you back into the conversation, because I want to be able to talk about what that change is.
Yeah, no, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. And I think that it's important to know like what people go through or what they're experiencing. And I want to definitely learn about what the shift is. And I do understand, my sister died by suicide, and she attempted 6 other times prior. And so there's that hopelessness, yet surrounded by millions, right? Like, that's what I always say, is my sister was surrounded by millions but yet felt completely alone. So I think it's just wonderful that you were able to express it in a way that people could really truly understand what that might feel like. So I would love to hear what has shifted and changed for you.
I wish I could actually identify the why, but I do know the what. For me, the what was that very thing, being all alone. And the feeling of being all alone, the feeling of just being isolated from other people. Now, to give context to this, I always say I'm a Virgo, so that kind of comes with the nature of just being, that zodiac sign, that we tend to have our energies more of self. We're not extroverted people. We're very much introverted people, and they're not, again, not trying to be global in terms of this is what a Virgo is, but that's kind of part of who I am. And so I did spend a lot of time, by myself, and that's a comfortable space for me to be. Context again, parents divorced when I was 10. And so that was kind of maybe the first step in a situation where I wasn't given the opportunity to kind of share what I was feeling and going through. And so, to give context to that, 1979. So I was born in 69. I'm a bit older probably than many of your audience members, but in context, kids those days, weren't given the opportunity to share what's going on. And so how this is, a mom and dad thing, or this is an adult thing. My sister didn't take that divorce easy, and she's 5 years older than me. She got involved in some things that were not beneficial to her life, and we'll put it that. And for me, I internalized a lot of stuff and really felt empty and alone and abandoned. So you take that, you go into the core, you experience other traumatic things, and you're really kind of going into adulthood without the necessary resources and the competence really to kind of deal with life. Okay. But when I made the last attempt, and I like saying that, my last attempt in 2021, something internal said, you need to do things differently. You need to start connecting with people. And so it was the reverse of everything that I was. I was, an introvert, a loner, all those things that, I made the intention of separating myself from other people. It's just a safe place to be. I started reaching out to people, complete strangers. And so, to give context, I'm on LinkedIn. That's kind of my base, my home, my social media home. and I had all of 2,000 connections. And you know how LinkedIn is. You know people by resume and picture, and that's about it. And so I I just started in this, and the context again, COVID and the quarantine. So we're all isolated. The world's flipped upside down, and we're trying to figure everything out. I just started, what I typically say is tapping on people's virtual door. Would you like to have a conversation? Was the query. Would you like to have a conversation? And this wasn't even about trying to heal or figuring things out for me. This is just something inside said you need to start connecting with people, and that's what I started to do. I started connecting with people. But for me, who I was connecting with were people who were kind of on the healing side of whatever trauma they were going through. So COVID and the quarantine facilitated a lot of change in humanity. And whether it be fate or the universe or God, or whatever title you want to give that, I was connecting with people who were making those positive changes in their own lives, personally and professionally. And that meant going through a whole lot of hell to come out victoriously. And so there were many times we cried on camera, well, not recording, but just in conversation. So virtually, they could be anywhere in the world, and we're just crying over their trauma and their victory story. And what I decided to do was record them. So I created a podcast called the Question Guy Podcast. It sits on my YouTube channel. And people were allowing me to share their stories of transformation. And what I didn't know at the time, but I do know now, is that I was living vicariously, and I do believe that's the correct word, through their victory stories. And so with every story, I was just craving their stories. I was craving the conversation. I was craving the connection. And I was making those connections. And people were sharing their stories with me about how they overcame so much stuff. And then, 2023, 2024, I began owning my own hurt. I was owning my own story. I was owning my own pain. And it really wasn't until 2024 that I became comfortable sharing that story. And so that's kind of what puts us in conversation, is because I'm more than comfortable now really talking about the vulnerability, the pain, the issues, and everything that I'm still thinking about your commercial, your advertisement. How there's so much stuff out there, and to put context to it, the Veterans Administration says that according to either 2022 or 2023, whatever year their data was collected, on average, this is on average, 22 veterans die by suicide every day. Now that number may be larger at this point, now that we're in 2025, and I don't know if you date your stuff, but I just did, so I apologize. But it's a significant number, and it's a number that needs to be addressed constantly, because I could easily be one of those statistics. I'm not, but I could be.
Well, thank you for sharing that also. And yes, stats are behind the curve. So we're still sitting in the 2020, well, 2022, I think, is the most recent updated stats.
For Veterans Administration?
Yeah, from all stats across the board. So yeah, we every time we refer it kind of goes back to 2022, but they're starting to get a little bit better. And I do know that the 22 veterans per day is an average, but what I love, and this might sound really weird, but what I love about it is we're putting a number, we're putting faces to what happens, right? And it's not that we have to keep going up on that number, because most suicides in general, there's about 132 suicides per day in the US, just across the board.
Right.
There's thousands across the world on daily, and it just continues to go up. But I think the important part is that we're creating awareness around those things, and it is now part of the conversation so that people are talking about it and noticing and hopefully being able to help somebody that might be struggling. And I do have another thought that popped in my head, but we have to go to our last quick sponsored break. I know I always do this, but once we get back, I will share that also. So we'll be right back after this quick sponsored break.
1,917 people die daily from suicide globally.
I lost my middle sister, Kelli, to a completed suicide on February 20th, 2017.
How does Make Mental Health Matter save lives?
Number 1. Awareness.
My story, however, it isn't unique. I am a domestic violence survivor and a recovering addict. For 14 years, I was in active addiction. And because of Kelli and the work that she does and the opportunity to have my voice heard, I was able to stay clean and sober and have hit a year. I'm still here. And if it wasn't for Kelli answering my call the day that I thought I was going to take my life.
2. Conversation.
I'm curious, and I know that I've heard a lot in the BIPOC community. It is very hush hush. It's like one of those things that you don't talk about. Like you literally feel like it's not a conversation you can have. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
First, shout out to Kelli because I'm glad that she asked the question. I researched you before I went on your show and I saw how real and authentic you were. And I just appreciate the question because it is different and we have to have tough, courageous conversations. So yes, I always say I'm a triple diversity threat. I'm a Black woman with multiple disabilities. Now, I'm not really a threat, but to other people, I may be because people fear the unknown and what they're uncomfortable with.
Number 3. Education.
Kelli's passionate commitment to mental health awareness is a beautiful thing. It's clear in her social media posts, it's clear in the resources that she puts together, in the activities that she provides, her collaboration with organizations, and the consistent way that she continues to deliver a message, encouraging people to understand that they can share openly and to break the stigma around mental health. Kelli's topics cover children and adults, talk about things that we can do as a community, things that we can do individually, and her website is packed with information and resources and all kinds of contacts that you can use to reach out, whether you're dealing with something yourself or you're looking to help somebody else who is struggling. I encourage you to check it out.
And like that, we're back again. If you just are joining the Make Mental Health Matter show, make sure you go back because you missed the whole half. So we have really been talking about your journey and your experience really with 5 suicide attempts and knowing that it may potentially have started when you were younger. You talked a little bit about your parents' divorce and not really having a voice to share how you were going through that. And then you made this transition, military, all the things that you did in military, and then the transition into civilian life. And knowing that, so multiple attempts over about a 20-year span, your last attempt 2021, your final last attempt, and now you're moving into connection, which the thought that popped into my head, because since I lost my sister, I've done a ton of education, gotten lots of certifications. That's what we give back to the community, is that education. But the biggest thing that I heard last year, I actually did a workshop and it was called Safer Suicide, which is kind of a weird title, but they talked about connection and community. And those are truly the 2 things that actually save people's lives. So when you can actually make that connection with somebody and bring them into a community, that's what's really scientifically or study wise, research wise, they're showing that that is one of the biggest things that can help people. And I know you also spoke about COVID time when we were all isolated, and some countries were even more isolated than America. But making those connections, and especially on LinkedIn with the healers. And I love that you said that, because I have found that the holistic community, at least for me, I tend to go to them a lot more versus maybe the professionals. But I just think that the energy that society is creating today can be really helpful and powerful. So there wasn't a question, that was just my thought. So I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Well, just for clarity's sake for your audience, I wasn't connecting with specific people for specific reasons. I was given the opportunity. Whoever said yes to the request to have a conversation, it just happened to be those people who did the internal work and were willing and wanting to share that conversation, their experience. And so from that, the Question Guy podcast came. So it was about people's personal transformation. And what people did, kind of like you, was taking that trauma and then doing something with it. It wasn't just about, oh, I'm better now. They became advocates or coaches or speakers or authors. And so typically brought people back who were kind of in that professional space now and created coaches corners. So this was the second, I call them podcasts, but they never really flourished. So shame on me. And then from those two conversations, I created the Envision Speaker Series, because it became this need to address things at a global or more at scale, because I was dealing with, toxic workplaces or whatever people were passionate about. I brought them in panel discussions, and we created the Envision. And I did have a couple of panel discussions on specifically men's mental health, because men really suck at this. We do. Maybe we were socialized into, just being to ourselves. And so that's another conversation altogether. But men's mental health and suicide prevention, men's mental health. And I actually I took the Envision speakers to North Carolina, and I live here in Virginia, to Ignite the Spark, which was the first of hopefully many annual events, not just in North Carolina, but beyond, where we brought me and my colleagues brought a panel of 7 other people to this church. And I could share that link if you want to. And so to have it in the description of wherever this sits, go back to our Facebook page or even my YouTube channel and share that space. It was great when people are impacted by suicide. It's not just about the individual, it's about the people who are left behind. And so those conversations had specific conversations on a playlist on my YouTube about how that actually happens. How do you recover when somebody in your family, mom, dad, brother, sister, doesn't really matter? How do you recover from that? And then men's mental health specifically. So all of those things now I'm specific to healing. And so I do focus on the veteran community, because I'm trying to build that audience. And then there's the whole walking the path, and what you talked about at the onset of this conversation is the piece that's missing is I kind of joke about this, but it's not like a ha funny joke, because I tried to take my life 5 times, and the Grim Reaper came back and sent me a heart attack in 2022. So a year after my 5th attempt, life said, well, we're going to take it anyway. And I survived that. And so, but I survived that with a whole lifestyle change. And so that kind of brings me to why I'm wanting to hike the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, I know we're like coming close to the end too, but tell more about that. I'm sorry, I forgot to bring that up. Tell us more about what you're going to be doing.
So the whole mission is to kind of help veterans recognize that their life doesn't have to be isolated. There's a whole lot of healing, especially in nature. So one community, build your tribe, but get outside. There's a whole, and I'm actually learning to be certified as a coach in what we call nature or earth-based healing practices, which are spiritual and natural modalities. My goal is to be that model, saying, hey, I'm as broken as you are, but what I've decided to do was hike the Appalachian Trail. Now, people have done it. It's a through hike. It's called a through hike. Springer Mountain, Georgia, all the way to Cotadin, Maine, 2,193 miles, as you identified earlier in the conversation. I'm going to do it. I've been training since I got out of the hospital, basically. My cardiologist said, you need to sit down for a while and kind of let your body recoup. And so he prescribed a bunch of medications, which I do not take. And I'm a doctor because it says so, but I'm not a medical doctor. But, my conversation with Laura Cross says, it's your body, your choice. And so my choice is to do this naturally. Redesign how I eat, redesign how I live, including exercise. I do a 12-mile hike every day. On the weekends, I pushed at 15, and this past Sunday, I did a 22-mile hike at, First Landing State Park. And so put this in context, 22 miles with a 50-pound pack takes about 8 hours. So it's a whole day's worth of work. But I'm just conditioning my body to hike the mountains. And so I have a GoFundMe campaign. I'm looking to raise money for it. I'm looking to really pull in the veteran community. Just kind of being that role model. I know you're a role model, you're a speaker. And so I'm kind of envious of your space. I want to step into it as much as I possibly can. Because there's a whole lot of conversation. There's a whole lot of need out there. If I can only, touch on that 22, veterans died by suicide. I know your scope is a bit broader, but even if we could drop that down to 0, which we need to, and I'm being absolutely serious about that, because even 22, if 21 less is good, but it still sucks. 21 veterans dying by suicide. What the hell? Sorry. I really
You're good.
I really get, angry at the fact that this is a thing and we're not addressing it. And we're not addressing it properly.
Yeah, and I'm gonna show, so walking the path. So it's, if you're listening, it's walking, WALKINGThepath.net, that you can go there. And I love that you are doing this, really showcasing to veterans. Also, I did the 29029 Everesting challenge. If you haven't heard of that, you should go check it out. Similar but different. And never thought I could ever accomplish. I only got 7.75 up. I didn't get the whole 13, but someday I will do all of them. But any final words that you want to share? And then I also know you have your Dr. Keith McNally, so that is DrKeithMcNally.com, that people can go to too. But final thoughts that you want to share?
I would just recommend, I would love to have a conversation with you. I do host 2 podcasts, one Trail to Transformation, which is the name of the campaign. So if you're a veteran advocate in any way, shape, or form, let's have that conversation. I also co-host another podcast called The Sacred Divine with a colleague of mine, Noemi Barris, and that's about helping women step into their spiritual nature and kind of stepping into a more robust life, really. But, that's kind of what I really want to tell people is it starts with owning it. You have to own that you've got a situation, a problem, a concern, and you can't deal with it on your own. I couldn't. I am in therapy. Yeah. I have conversations with people. You have to build that cheerleading team around you. It's absolutely necessary. You cannot do this alone, no matter how hard you think you can. I go back to Yoda. There's do or you do not. There is no try. you've got to start building the team and owning your situation so that you can be comfortable talking about it.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I literally could talk to you for hours, but we're coming to the end. So, thank you so much for being an amazing guest and sharing your experience and stepping into having these conversations, because it's not always easy. But the more we talk about it, the easier it gets, right? And then that hopefully starts you on the path of healing. So, thank you so much again. I really appreciate you.
Kelly, thank you so much for having me as a guest. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, y'all. That was another amazing episode of the Make Mental Health Matter show. I hope you got some really great nuggets out of that, because I think there was so much, like, we probably could have like chunked those out and had full on conversations about each of the things that we talked about. But we did it all in the short amount of time that we have. Understanding that you are really not alone. There are lots of people out there that want to help, but it's really hard to get to that place to ask for help. It's also sometimes hard to get out of your comfort zone. But sometimes things happen in life that shake it up and move us towards that. So even if it's one simple step that you can take today to start moving into a space that will be helpful for you, if you are somebody that is struggling, it could be as simple as making a connection. It could be as simple as sending a text message. It could be as simple as going to one of Dr. Keith's websites and looking through the information that he offers, or getting a part of the team and backing him up on this incredible journey. No matter what you do, just take one simple small step. And the more simple, small steps that you take, the easier it's going to get. And I get it, that may sound hard, but even if it's just getting out of bed and going downstairs, stepping outside for a moment, whatever that might be, take that one simple step. But the next step you should take is coming back here next Monday. I go live every single Monday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on E360 TV, or you can listen on Dream Vision 7 Radio at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. No matter what, I'll see ya next week. Bye, y'all.